And since the only test of success of something is how large an audience it attracts, it goes viral,
Right.
It's a democracy of idiots.
Okay. Welcome back to the Hudson Valley One Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Shaw, the head honcho, Getty Sveikauskas, publisher, here with me today.
Hello, Zach. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm still a little tired from staying up late to follow the election results.
Yeah, well, this was a test. We don't have young editors, and keeping them up till 1:30 was very difficult, especially being one of them. I concur with that.
Yes, right, yes. And I have so many fond memories, having worked with you over the decades, of election night and staying up and watching the results, and sometimes you get some surprises. What surprised you this year?
One thing that was not a pleasant surprise was that the vote came in late. That is from the Board of Elections, so that I sat there. I believe there was a football game going on at the same time, or something, so that I kept checking back to see whether the returns had come in. And it was only until, close to 11 o'clock, I think, that they started coming in, and they poured in after that. So it was quite interesting, but it interrupted my nap time.
I've been asked so many times, why does the Board of Elections results page look like it's from 1992, era website? And it's because everyone is sitting there loading it over and over again, right?
Yep, that's right.
So at least it was loading last night.
Yeah. The Board of Elections is one of our more antiquated institutions. Speaking of, they're going to be moving, as you know, from here on Wall Street to the Daley Freeman building, and I just passed that on the wrong assumption that the doctor I was going to see was on that street, and there it was. It said Daley Freeman across it, and the Freeman moved to a place smaller than this little place here.
Really?
Nearby on Green Street. So, it's like the Cheshire Cat, all that's left is the smile.
Well, it smiles on and...
Smile on, yes. Now, with the election itself was really interesting in that I was covering the county legislature, and the county legislature has changed as an institution when they passed the charter from something where the head of the legislature, the chairman of the legislature, was the chief executive officer of the county, to there being a county executive.
Okay.
And that change meant that, first of all, it left the legislature with less to do, but the head of the legislature there was no longer a fusion of the executive and legislative powers, but they're separate. So Pat Ryan on the 6th floor is kind of the executive, and the legislative is left, it's sort of like Congress under a strong president. They have less to do, or they have less power over what happens.
Okay.
Even though they say, according to, the way the religion of the Constitution works, we're separate but equal.
Right, sure.
To be equal, you need to have some power. For instance, the county exec and his 3 executives, deputy executives, make more money than probably double the money that the 33 legislators make.
Okay.
It gives you some idea of the amount of time and the power they have.
And that was something I was wondering. When you become an alderman or a legislator, what do you get paid? How does that work? If you had a job before?
Well, the thing is that you have to be able to say, I just do it for my love of the county or love of the town, and you get paid very little. Except there's this little clause that if you stay in your job for 10 years, if you duke it out that long, you get full paid health insurance. So they don't talk about that very much.
Okay, so some people getting elected for health insurance, possibly.
But you do think of it. Yeah.
There's lots of incentives, right? I mean, I'm sure that also makes you an influential person in your community, lots of networking opportunities. And of course, we know at the higher ends of government, people are constantly coming out of government to go work in the corporate world in those areas, right? Does that happen on the local level?
Yeah. Well, it's of course, but it's really, for most of them, they're not going anywhere else. It's a dead end. They might become supervisor of their town or something like that, but or get a job in state government, as our ex-county executive has.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, he didn't last as commissioner, but he lasted throughout the Cuomo administration and was non-hockled out.
Okay. So now, having kind of probed the structure of how these legislative bodies and governing bodies
Okay, so what happened was
what happened?
There were 12 Democrats and 11 Republicans, and now there are 16 Democrats and 7 Republicans.
And that didn't really surprise anyone, right? Lots of Democrats moving into the area.
That's what it seemed. But what happened was a lot of Democrats moved into the area, and nothing changed. And then came this year's election, and everything changed. 6 of them decided to retire, the usual turnover, and those were mostly replaced by people of other persuasions. So that, for instance, in Saugerties, you had 2 Democrats elected in 2 Republican seats, and there were changes throughout the county, and the Democrats did really well. Basically, the Republican Party, regrettably, has become a regional party. They're like the Dixiecrats. They're the South. They represent the southern part of the county, southeastern part, for the most part.
Generally, the more rural part.
No, or just different. More, I think I would describe it as more oriented toward Poughkeepsie or Middletown, toward Orange and Dutchess counties. That it's closer to the city. Plattekill is a good one. Shawangunk. Lloyd, to some degree, has become more Republican. Marlborough is hugely Republican. And then it gets thin pickings after that. The only guy who, from outside, from north of Route 299 in New Paltz, probably, is Dean Fabiano, who represents part of the town of Ulster and town of Kingston. Mm-hmm. Part of Saugerties and Ulster. And he was the only Republican. If you look at it and made the map, Democrats were red, and he'd be the only blue island.
Right.
Yeah, I mean blue.
Yeah.
Then he'd be the only red island. Yeah.
Yeah. So, having looked at the results, are there more Democrats coming to those areas? And also, what was voter turnout like to you? It seemed a little low.
It's always low. Yeah. There was really nothing. There was very few competitive races because in a lot of the places, as you know, long-time incumbents were not opposed. So therefore, you go there. There's no choices. It doesn't really encourage you to vote more.
Now, I heard a rumor, maybe even read a story that there was a low Republican voter turnout because of the mask mandates. You were mandated to wear a mask to the voting, and I thought that was kind of an interesting.
I don't know. That's like some of those alternative drugs that people who don't believe in vaccination go for. They're untested. There's little validation for them, but part of being kind of feeling oppressed is that you look for an enemy, somebody who's fooling you, and you're the victim. You want to be the victim of somebody. You can't be just a victim without somebody, some overlord.
Right.
So what happened was that the vaccine became the science, and they laughed at it and wanted to find another route, and therefore the vaccine people were against some common sense alternatives that really helped, and everybody knew it. They were suppressing it.
Well, this is for all my Woodstock people, but why do there have to be Democrats and Republicans? Why do there have to be vaccine people and non-vaccine people? Can't we acknowledge that these, issues that face us require a nuanced view and that both sides have a point? Or are there some issues in which one side is completely wrong?
Well, all we know is that everybody pleads for, let's listen to each other. Let's discuss things and work out something that.
I don't think that's
where
happening.
there's
I think
something
people are
for
saying,
everybody.
you're wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
the tone of
Exactly.
it,
You're wrong. That's it. So you find some reason that they're wrong, and it's a different kind of society than we're used to. But the difficulty is when you combine that sense you're wrong with a two-party system, and in which there's a lot of guns and a lot of contempt for law, you get a potentially volatile situation.
Mm-hmm. But then again, who was it? Churchill or someone that said democracy is the worst form of government, but all the rest are
That's right.
or something like that. Yeah,
that's right. But it requires. If you go to Winston Churchill's Parliament, you notice the civility of of everyone.
Yeah. Well,
The
where's that
people were
going?
nasty in terms of didn't believe what other people were saying, but they would make fun. They would be my learned friend. And they would face each other across the aisle. Here, there's left to right. People only deal with their own kind, and it just is I think a terrible way for a civilization to be founded upon.
we gotta change something here. And with back to the election, the thing that surprised me the most was the closest race. Right, was the proposition for same-day voting that failed by the tiniest of margins. What's up with that? Why was there so much opposition to that one?
I don't know.
You don't know?
That was true of the state propositions too. Apparently, a lot of them were defeated, even though most people said, it's quite reasonable. One of them was unduly complicated, and I can understand that, but others were just, simple, harmless things that improved the governments just a little bit.
Yeah, that seemed like a no-brainer for me. But if you have a reason why we shouldn't have same-day voting, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to know more about the rationale behind that. The other thing that, it didn't surprise me, but I wanted to ask you about this. So my ward, Ward 9, Michelle Hirsch, won handily in that she was
Being
unopposed.
unopposed, yes,
However,
it helps.
there were like 200 some odd write-in votes. And when it's reported in the Board of Elections, you don't see the names of the write-in votes. I'm so curious, is that all the same person? Is that just a protest? What's going on with that? And why wasn't there a candidate? There are so many.
Well, I'm not sure. There are two possibilities. One, that was an organized write-in. The other is that Donald Duck beat Mickey Mouse by 2 votes in the write-ins.
Right. Do people really do that? Right? Like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's great. I've always wanted to write in my own presidential candidates because I've pretty much been disappointed with all of those possibilities over the last years. But on a local level, I was just like, well, I'll write my friend and write you in. Maybe that's what we should do. Get you in there.
Oh, God. You can't. Thank God nobody can spell my long name.
Everyone in journalism and in news who's been close to politics says the same exact thing when you suggest, maybe you should run because you're so knowledgeable. It's like, I'm very happy on this side. Have you found that covering politics makes you happy to be on this side and not that side?
Well, I think good journalists shouldn't aspire to be politicians. Now, there's a guy, a really good opinion writer for the New York Times named Nick Kristof, who's, I think, going to be trying to be governor of either Washington or Oregon, one of those states, because he wants to express his views politically. But I don't think that's the right job. I regard all humanity as alien to me. Well, it's a good start.
I guess that's a prerequisite for being a journalist to some degree.
Once you consider yourself another species and you're observing this very interesting kind of thing, you've got the right tack.
Well, and also we live in a day and age where the media has incredible influence and power. I wouldn't necessarily say it rivals politicians on the local level, but I've seen that in writing the headlines for the website. For example, there's a COVID story where we had Saugerties High School had significantly more COVID cases than the other high schools in the area. And so there's so many ways to write that headline. You can write COVID surges in Saugerties, it's a big problem. Or you could say the schools are keeping COVID infections down under 2%. It's happening outside of the school. So that is a lot of power and influence on people.
What did you write?
I don't recall, but I think I balanced it out. I said something like, local school districts keep COVID infections under 2%, Socrates is, except for Socrates, something like that.
Right.
Because part of what writing the headlines is kind of not telling the whole story and being like, except for Socrates, well, what's with Socrates? And then you can actually become informed, whereas most people these days read the headline and then just move on and they say, okay, now I know what this is about. So I'm just curious, like, if you see it that way, or if you are trying to walk that fine line between writing to, because you can't write to express your own opinions. That would be editorial, an opinion. I'm not trying to inject my opinion into the headlines. I'm trying to frame it in a way that pulls people into the story to be informed.
Well, I always thought that the job of a journalist is to give everyone their best shot. That is, if somebody says something stupid, it doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican, you write it down and that comes out. Or if they make fun of each other, or if they actually have an intelligent conversation, your job is to kind of try to express that. And here they are, people disagreeing with each other, and if you explain each one's position as rationally as possible, I think you do it justice. You give the sense of the whole much more. Mm-hmm. Where if you're kind of tilt one way or the other, it's not a true picture. Just as in any description, as in any painting.
And yet that's what we see outside of local media, online, just one-sided bubbles that people stay inside of that just confirm their own beliefs, and if they see something that runs against that, they just find a source that...
Well, the thing we're worried about is really not journalism, but the social media. Mm-hmm. Because things spread so much faster. It's like a forest fire. You light a match and it goes off, and there could be no validity at all. It could be just a total hoax, which most of them are.
Oh, many. Yeah,
many.
Some. But I think that has been created because so much media, in the mainstream is just untrustworthy at this point. I mean, you've got, like a CNN saying Joe Rogan took horse dewormer, and then CNN appears on his show, and he says, "Okay, this is factually untrue. I did not take a horse dewormer. I took a people medicine prescribed by a doctor," and CNN just doubles down on, "No, we were right. We are not lying." And it's just, I think every step of the way that we go, people lose their trust in media. And
if you say the media are not trustworthy and you go to the social media, that's sort of an exercise on, you think that's irresponsible and stupid. Take this.
Yeah.
And it goes, and since the only test of success of something is how large an audience it attracts, it goes viral.
Right.
And it's a democracy of idiots.
Okay. I think that's our lead-in clip. Well, we got to get to an editorial meeting. We'll keep this one short for you all. Next week, we're going to have Brian Hollander back on to discuss whatever the news is next week. Thank you, Getty, for...
You're welcome, and you're lucky it was short, folks.
The political potpourri.
Okay.
We'll see you next time on the Hudson Valley One Podcast.
Bye-bye.